Hello, and welcome to the virtual Scandinavia House and today's book talk with Helen Russell on The Danish Secret to Happy Kids, her deeply researched guide to the Nordic way of parenting. The Danish Secret to Happy Kids shares what Russell has learned firsthand and through talking to Nordic psychologists, sociologists, and teachers about rearing well-balanced children. In doing so, she dives into the parenting culture of Denmark and other Nordic countries, from parental leave to school structure to screen time. Combining intellectual curiosity, research with observation, this positive, thought-provoking parenting book for readers curious about cultural differences. The novel is published by Source Books, and you can find it at your local bookstore or bookshop.org. I will put the link below. Please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A function, and we'll get to them towards the end of the program. Helen Russell is an author, journalist, and speaker who explores cultural approaches to emotions. She lives in Denmark. Please welcome Helen.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me today. So I'm Helen. I am an accidental mother of Vikings. I will explain. I moved to Denmark for a year as a carefree, child-free woman, and ended up staying a decade and parenting a very loud mini redhead and surprise twins, who you may hear because it's Danish school holiday right now. So if there's thundering from above, that's them. It's not an earthquake. So I was and still am utterly clueless in both the rules of parenting and Nordic life. So every day is a school day, because Nordic children, I discovered, are raised differently. They eat differently, they play differently, they learn differently. They spend hours out in nature, even when the weather is terrible, which it regularly is. And yet they grow up to be some of the happiest people on the planet. So my question was, how? As a journalist by trade, as we heard there, I decided to turn my focus to the Scandinavian model, to what they were doing differently in the Nordic countries, what I was experiencing all around me every day, to embark on a sense of discovery about parenting culture in the Nordic countries, from parental leave policies to school structure, screen time, and the surprising hacks and tips and tricks and customs that somehow result in these very well-adjusted, resilient, healthy, happy Nordics who regularly top the happiness polls. So I'm inviting you to come with me today as we take a peek behind the cultural curtain at a world where preschoolers wield axes, no one starts school to the age of 6 at the earliest, because there are aspects of Viking parenting that can be applied wherever we are and make for happier, healthier children, even adults, all of us, in fact. So there are some things I've learned about how to raise a Viking from other parents and experts I would love to share with you, from the mad to the must try this now. And I've got these 10 life lessons that I now try and live by to live in a more sort of Viking Danish way. So I'd love to share these, but I'll start by explaining a little bit about who I am and how I came to be in Denmark. So as you heard, I'm a journalist by trade. I was editor of marieclaire.co.uk. I was Guardian correspondent for 10 years. And I freelanced for lots of different people. And then I had no intention of leaving Marie Claire, really, until one wet Wednesday, my husband came home and told me he'd been offered his dream job working for Lego in Denmark. Now, I knew nothing about Denmark at the time. I couldn't have pointed out to you Denmark on a map of Denmark. But we visited one weekend just to check the place out. And when I stepped off the plane, I saw this. You might remember this advert, the Carlsberg beer advert. Denmark had just been voted the happiest country in the world. And I became fascinated by this. I thought, what is this tiny country of just 5.6 million people? What are they doing? Is there something in the water? Could beer, bacon, and Danish pastries really make you that happy? So we began to look around us and notice that the people we saw, they didn't look like us, quite apart from the fact that they were all strapping Vikings towering above me. I'm short, you can't tell here. But people looked more relaxed. They looked healthier. They took their time to stop and eat together or talk or just be. And we were impressed. My husband begged me to consider it. This other life possibility dangled in front of us. And having been quite stressed living the city life for 10 years before that, we seriously considered it. Now, Denmark had not only just been voted the happiest country in the world, it actually has been really high up on the happiness polls in studies going back to the 1970s. And I became really curious about this. And it's not just Denmark either. So when I got out there and got into the into the countryside of where we were in Denmark. I took myself to a cafe, and as a repressed British woman, naturally my first impulse was to eat my big new emotions. And in this coffee shop on that first day, I started hearing this phrase that has now permeated the world over, but when I first moved here, it was still pretty new. It's this phrase that is pretty much impossible for anyone who hasn't been born Viking to pronounce correctly. I'm going to have a go, and any Danes can correct me, but hygge. This word that defies literal translation, but the best explanation I've seen is this one: the complete absence of anything annoying or emotionally overwhelming, the presence of gentle, soothing things. Now, why does this matter? Well, because in Denmark, anyone who's been here may know that if you start listening in to the conversations around you, and all Danes speak excellent English, but you'll hear this in Danish, this word, this hygge, is almost used in every second sentence in Denmark. It's almost like a key performance indicator for any social gathering. So people were talking about a hyggelig time they were looking forward to, or the hygge that they were currently enjoying, or a hygge time that they had last Friday. And this idea of cozy togetherness, of being kind to yourself, of celebrating soft skills and the more kind of pleasurable things in life, and indulging a little bit. Really, we see this go through the Nordic countries. And as I said, it's not just Denmark that keeps coming top of the polls, the other ones as well. So Finland this year has just knocked Denmark off the top spot. But usually the Nordic nations are jostling for these top spots on the happiness poll. So I wanted to find out why. So intention set, challenge outline. My husband and I moved across the North Sea. We packed all of our belongings from our lower ground flat in London, shipped them across the North Sea, and started our new life in Denmark. And I began to see straight away that it was very different. I noticed that the family structures around me weren't like the ones I was used to back home. So first of all, in Denmark, it's completely normal to embrace fertility treatment, to embrace different types of family. So I'd love to talk about modern family, Nordic style. There are 37 different types of family unit in Denmark, according to the government website. And these range from everything from two mums, to dads, to fostered children, to single parent families. There is much more of an idea that what matters is how much a child is loved, and there's no judgment and no shade thrown on anyone who's doing things in a little bit more of an unconventional way. So the Danish Prime Minister, for example, Mette Frederiksen, came to power, the youngest ever Danish Prime Minister, as a single mother of two. She is since married and now lives in a blended family with her husband and his children in a chaotic household of 7, which must be total chaos. But it's just to show how it's very normal here. In Finland, you may remember Sanna Marin, the former head of SWIT for Finland. She was raised by 2 mums. She came to power, then had a baby, then got married. So it's perfectly normal to just approach family in a different way in the Nordic countries, and there's no judgment. Now, having been raised, I don't know about your circumstances, but I was raised as the only child of a single mother growing up in the UK. I was often made to feel as though my family were lesser somehow. And I ended up kind of internalizing that, almost believing it. But it's not true. It can't be. What matters is how much we're loved, and internalizing any kind of shame about our own family circumstances in a world where, you know, half of all marriages are breaking down anyway. It just seems a much more inclusive way to think about the family unit, that it's about care and support and raising these happy, healthy children. And in Denmark, they kind of make that easier. There's a big emphasis put on fertility treatment, on helping people to have children if they want them. So 10% of all pregnancies in Denmark are done via assisted reproduction. There is IVF help to have not only one child, but a second child for free in Denmark. There is an assumption that if you want to have children and you can care for them well, you should be able to have them. So there's also a really big industry around sperm in Denmark. It's one of the biggest exports, along with Lego, is sperm. And actually, supplies of sperm to the UK, where I'm from, have gone up year on year, now account for 30% of all new imported donor sperm in what's being called the gentle Viking invasion. So there is much more of a culture that is okay. There's no stigma attached to donating here, and it's perfectly normal if you decide to become a solo mom or a single mother from donor sperm. No one's going to think badly of you in Denmark. So once you decide you're going to start your family life in Denmark, I was fortunate enough, after years of fertility treatment in the UK, which did not go well and was quite stressful, in Denmark, I was really helped to have a family, which I was hugely grateful for. And then becoming a parent in Denmark really underlined to me how differently they do things here and how it helps lay the foundations for happy kids. So congratulations, it's a Viking. I gave birth to a very loud mini redhead, started loud, carried on loud. You'll doubtless hear him soon. But if you have a baby in Denmark, you get 52 weeks leave, parental leave, paid, which has been shown to improve maternal health. And actually women's earnings rise 7% for every month of leave her partner takes. So there's use it or lose it, so that the dad takes time too. And this means that it's not just the idea that fathers will only see their children after the children are in bed during the week, for example, not getting home till, say, 7 p.m. or only at the weekends. Here, there is much more of a culture that everyone gets stuck in, and that a child has a relationship with both parents. And I don't say this to make you all jealous, don't worry, we'll come to the cons as well as the pros later, but just that there is a way, and it's not pure altruism. I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind when we're thinking about the Nordic countries. It's not just that this is a nice thing to do, and so the Nordic countries are doing it just because they are very cozy and they believe in elves and fairies and everything is wonderful. No, they do it because it makes sense. So Danes also get 6 months, from age 6 months plus, they get guaranteed place in high quality local government run daycare, and it's 75% subsidized by the state. So I would pay the equivalent of maybe $400 a month for my child, and the state would pay the rest. And as I say, they are not doing this just to be nice. They are doing it because studies show now unequivocally that for every $1 invested in childcare, the wider economy gets at least $1.50 to $1.80 back. So it all came about post-World War II, when the Danish government decided they needed to expand the labour force. They thought, oh, well, hang on, women could play a part in that, but then we're going to need to offer high quality subsidised childcare, and so they did. And so the money they get back in taxes makes it all worthwhile. So it's not altruism, it's how it makes sense. And now in Denmark, 80% of mothers work, and by around age 10 months, most children are in daycare. And I call it daycare just for ease of translation. It's actually not daycare. It's vuggestue from age 0 to 3 in Denmark, and then børnehave age 3 to 6. And that translates as the nursery room, and then the children's garden, like a kindergarten. And these are run by highly educated pedagogues or early years educators. They will have at least a bachelor degree. They'll be incredibly caring. They're very tuned in on things like attachment theory, which coincidentally, John Bowlby attachment theory, anyone familiar with that, may have qualms about sending children off to an institution or to someone else looking after them other than the parents so early. Although, of course, for many of us, it's an economic necessity. We don't have much choice these days, where 2 incomes are often needed for a household. But as a side note, John Bowlby was commissioned by the World Health Organization in the 1950s to do a report on the impact of being separated from parents on children. And he looked at children who had been orphaned by war in, I think they were Swiss children, French children, none of them from the Nordic countries. And actually children orphaned by war, that's an incredibly different situation to these warm, welcoming, early years educator run places that I see around me in the Nordics and during my research and travels here. So that my children have benefited hugely from them. And most people in Denmark think that it's good to help children socialize. They don't see it as a sacrifice to put their children into these places. They see it as good for them. So as I say, this is not altruism. The money, it comes back to the economy, then it's reinvested for the good of the people at large and for the good of the economy. So Norway, another Nordic country, recently valued the impact of working mothers on the economy, and they put it at 800 billion, the same as the value of the oil reserves. So just shows what a kind of valued workforce it is for women in the Nordic countries, and why these governments make all of these steps to make sure that people can still work. The next thing I learned in the Nordic countries was about work, life, and then the crucial balance part. So the official working week in Denmark is 37 hours, already far lower than I have been used to in London. But OECD studies show the average Dane is only putting in 33 hours a week. Naturally, at first, I presume this made Danes massive slackers, but actually, studies show that workers are 12% more productive when they're in a positive state of mind, and actually Denmark has the happiest workforce in the world. there is a sense that they are working smarter, not harder. There's so much research now around the 4-day week and around productivity. And we see time and again that Nordic countries, look at Novo Nordisk, they are punching far above their weight, and they are reaching really high levels of productivity. It's the second most productive country in the world, higher productivity levels than Japan, Australia, the US. But they are not working these crazy long hours. There isn't the same culture of presenteeism. And the impact this has on children is huge. So the Danish working week is largely set up around kindergarten, so around what small people, what the mini Vikings are doing. So the daycare opens at around 8 a.m. Most offices start at 8 a.m. Daycare ends at around 4. Most offices end at around 4. So it's totally accepted in a meeting that you can say, whether you're the CEO or the cleaner, I have to go now to pick up my kids, men and women, to pick up my kids and make dinner. And that's okay. It's perfectly normal. This family time has been created. So people might do more work again, maybe after 7 p.m. when the children are in bed. But between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. has been sort of earmarked as this sacred family time. And most Danes live that way. There is more of the structure that's what you do. You don't call someone during that time. You don't schedule a meeting in that time. I live near Lego HQ now, where my husband was working, and I was in the car park, the big multi-story car park of Lego, a big multinational, at 5 p.m. I was the only car in there. So it's not just rhetoric. The reality backs this up for a lot of people as well. In general, although there'll be some exceptions and there'll be a lot of whataboutery saying, well, actually, I work really long hours. In general, studies show that Danes are working these short working weeks and spending more time with their family than other people. They're not working harder, they're working smarter. So my next life lesson in living Danishly was around the fact that having these very firm ideas of how I should work makes for quite entitled employees sometimes, but also really helps foster this kind of Viking spirit. I will explain. So the unions, anyone who's been following Tesla's journey in the Nordic countries may be aware of this, but the unions are very strong in the Nordic countries. There is a sense that you're banded together, you're in it with other people, everyone has your back. So, for example, Tesla, again, there's strike going on since October. In Denmark, in Carlsberg, the beer manufacturer, a few years back, there was a mutiny when Carlsberg decided that it was no longer going to allow free beer, only at lunchtime. And people were outraged. They thought they should be able to drink beer all day long. Lego had a big kerfuffle when they changed coffee supplier without consultation. So the office workers were very angry that they hadn't been asked about this. The message boards went mad. There was a sense that whether you are white collar or blue collar, you are part of a union in the Nordic countries and they will support you. And so you are very sort of fiercely defending the space you have, which means again that family time is also earmarked, that you're not going to take any nonsense from your employer. And of course, having healthcare as paid for by taxes really helps with that, because you don't worry that if you're going to lose your job, you'll also lose your healthcare, which makes for much more demanding employees and this Viking spirit. But it also means that because you are all in it together, there's this great Danish word, samfundssind, that really strikes a chord when it comes to raising mini Vikings. And samfundssind is a Danish word that comes from samfund, which is community, and sind, mind. So it's community mindset. And samfundssind is, I'm in the way of it, sorry. Samfundssind is hugely important in Denmark. You see it in all of the leisure activities that Danes have all this time for, because they're only working these short working weeks. So many people are members of clubs or associations. Children tend to be members of clubs and associations for maybe football or swimming or gymnastics. And these are all run by volunteers, run by parent volunteers who will finish their day job and then go and volunteer as the basketball coach or as a scout leader. And it means that it's kind of expected that everyone will do that. So even if you have no discernible skills, my husband and I are often teased because we are thought of as such valued members of society that whenever we volunteer to teach swimming or scouts or do any of this stuff, we are put on the very glamorous job of delivering trash bags, because the local kommune, the local government, give the job of delivering food waste bags. All food waste has to go in these green bags in Denmark. This job is given to the local clubs or associations, and then the government gives them a bit of money to take the job off their hands. So if you are not considered useful enough to teach the swimming or teach the scouts, you are asked to deliver bin bags from door to door. And no one is too grand to deliver trash bags in Denmark. So you might get a CEO delivering your food waste bags to your house. My husband was a little put out by this at the beginning. He was like, I've got 2 degrees. Why am I delivering trash bags? But nobody is too grand to deliver trash bags in Denmark. It's samfundssind, it's community spirit, community mindedness. And so you do it because that's a part of what it means to be part of this society. And this really helps foster the high levels of Danish trust. Now, this is something you may have heard about, you may have come across. Trust is so high in Denmark. 79% of Danes trust most people, which I found extraordinary. Okay, so it's a small country, 5.8 million, but that's about the size of South London, and I didn't trust everyone there either. But Danes trust each other so much they are happy to let their babies sleep outside in prams as they pop into a cafe for a coffee or a sandwich, or in this case, go for a swim. Now, as you will know, this is not the case in many places around the world. You'll remember the story of the Dane in New York who left her baby outside to sleep and was arrested for child neglect. That doesn't happen here. It's perfectly normal. And there is a trust that no one will steal your babies, no harm will come to them. And this trust plays into every area of Nordic life. It's not just Denmark. There is a sense that you pay your taxes because you trust that your neighbours will also do that. They will also contribute their fair share. You volunteer to deliver trash bags because you know that your neighbour is teaching your kid to play basketball. There is a sense that even politicians, notoriously untrusted in most countries, enjoy a relatively good reputation in Denmark. I mean relatively. They are generally thought of as normal people doing their best to run the country. And as a journalist, I've interviewed politicians in places around the world, and in Denmark the access to politicians is a lot easier. It's a lot more fluid because there isn't the same hierarchy. There's a very flat hierarchical structure in Danish life. There's a real love of consensus. So if you want to speak to somebody, it doesn't matter if they are important in inverted commas, you should be able to speak to them. There are not so many of these vertical power relationships. It's much more horizontal. And so there is trust, and this trust becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you trust the people around you, you have the headspace to be happy. And I grew up in the UK with the full force of the Stranger Danger campaign, where we were taught that the world was generally a scary place and strangers were not to be trusted. Well, in Denmark, levels of trust have always been high and have actually been on the rise by a few percent in recent years. Children are taught that the world is essentially a good place. Most people are not out to get them. So whereas trust levels in the US have dropped from 60% to 30% in the last 50 years, in Denmark, it's just carried on creeping up and creeping up. And you may remember a while ago, there was a famous wallet study where researchers dropped wallets in 17,000 wallets they dropped in cities around the world to see how often these were returned. Anyone like to guess where Denmark came? Yep, the Nordic countries came out top and Denmark came out top with 80% of wallets returned with money in them. So there is a sense that you trust the people around you, they tend to behave better. And actually you have the headspace to be happy if you're not worried that your neighbour is going to rob you to put food on their table, because everyone is, in theory, taken care of by the state, funded by taxes. Not pure altruism. Again, we know from studies from the US, from Japan, from other wealthy societies, that where there is less inequality, areas with less inequality, happiness levels are much higher. So it doesn't matter how personally wealthy you are, if you are living in an area of large inequality, it's going to really impact your happiness level. So in Denmark, it flips the other way, is that of course there are wealthy people and people who have less money, but in general, in theory, most people should be taken care of to have their basic needs at least met. Which frees you up, right? Frees you up to do all of these hobbies and clubs and associations. So with all of this leisure time, there's much more of a culture of getting active, and for children as well. And we know now how important that is for children. So active transport is really big in Denmark. Norway and Denmark are the countries with the highest levels of active transport in the world. So that means children who get themselves to school, either by walking, going on their bikes, by going on scooters. And it's just the norm here, and it's pretty safe as well. So the level of bikes in Denmark is a cliche, but it's one for a reason, right? 50% of Copenhageners commute to work via bike. Everyone I've met owns at least one bike, and many sign up for these clubs or associations to turn a casual bike ride into a group event. So there are 80,000 clubs and associations, hobby clubs in Denmark. And the average Dane is a member of 2.8 clubs, I learned. But this means that children see their parents being active and having a life and prioritizing their own health and happiness and sense of belonging. And so children grow up with that sense of self-worth that, firstly, being a grown-up is not terrifying. Look, adults are having a nice time too. I shouldn't be scared of growing up. And secondly, the children, they have it modeled to them how to live well, that you need to be active to make your body feel good, to make your mind feel good. So that's much more normalized here. What they also have in Denmark and the Nordic countries is the emphasis on play. So we know now that play is hugely important. It's no surprise that the country that brought us Lego and Hans Christian Andersen should be pretty good on children. But we know now that play makes you happier and healthier, that actually all children, if left to their own devices, will play. So if they're not playing, it's a sign that something is wrong. And in Denmark and all of the Nordic countries, in fact, play is so important that they named it twice. It's basically the New York of the Nordic countries. So in Danish and all of the Nordic languages, there is a word for intrinsically motivated, imaginative, free-form play, and that's leg in Danish. Then there's another word for if you are playing a board game or a sport or a musical instrument, and in Danish that's spiller. And each of the Nordic countries, the languages, make this distinction because play is so important. You've got to make sure you're having both of these things. And in Denmark, children play exclusively until the age of 6. Throughout the Nordic countries, children just play, no school before that. In Finland, they don't start school till they turn 7, which means that play is encouraged far more than book learning all the way up past 6 and throughout school. Whereas if you look at in the US right now, the research I was doing in this area, many children are now so overscheduled that they have no time to play. That the catch-up post-COVID has meant that some places are doing away with recess altogether, or are trying to cram in extra tutoring, or parents are feeling that they must just schedule their kids to just give them that advantage later on. Whereas studies now show from the Nordic countries and from Cambridge University in the UK that there is no difference between children who learn through play and children who learn through book learning. And in fact, children who learn through play have significantly lower levels of stress. So that actually many are now advocating that this is a really important way that we should all be looking to help with childhood mental health, to help with lowering stress levels, that learning through play is really important. Now, there's a lot of play research coming out of the Nordic countries. Some of you, I'm sure, follow this. I would say that for me, there's a lot of play research coming on. Unfortunately, it's not terribly inspiring often. So to break it down in a way that won't make anyone else's eyes bleed, I now think of the 4 different types of play that the Nordic countries prioritize. So you've got the 2 types for starters. You've got the spiller and the leg. So you've got the intrinsically motivated and then the board games, music, sport. But you also need these 4 types as well. 4 types of play. So there's free play, which I now think of in terms of decorating a cake. So free play would be, you know where mum keeps the sprinkles and icing, go wild. Then there's guided, can you make your cake look like a narwhal? Then there's gamification, who can make their cake look like a narwhal the fastest? Clearly my son and my dog can, if you can hear them in the background there. And then there's instruction, best attempted after a really good night's sleep. But this is going through with step-by-step instructions to a child of how to do something. So in Denmark, there is a sense that this is sort of common knowledge that it's or it's just done inherently and people don't think about it. But all of these types of play are sort of ticked off on a daily basis so that children are getting everything. And parents are encouraged to play with their children, not just playing with siblings, not just playing with their peers, but parents are encouraged to play with their children because that helps the parents as well. It helps foster that bond, that connection, that sort of eye contact, one-on-one time, and anything that gets us away from screens, which we'll come to later, is considered a really good thing. What they also do in Denmark is they play outside no matter what. Now, it's nice outside now. It's been hammering it down for the last few days, torrential rain. But in Denmark and all of the Nordic countries have variations on this phrase that I don't know about you, but my grandmother was always saying, that there's no such thing as bad weather, just the wrong clothes. And if you dress in just the right technical outerwear, you can go outside no matter what the weather. So at a time when 3/4 of UK and American children are spending less time outside apparently than prison inmates, Danish children and Nordic children are outside no matter what, which is really important. Playing outdoors has been shown to help improve cooperation, to reduce stress, to help with concentration, and even out differences between high achieving and low achieving children. So what's really helpful, I think, is to understand that they have this culture of something called friluftsliv, or free air life, whereby it's considered that the Viking ancestors had to go out no matter what the weather. So modern day descendants think, well, we better do the same. And as part of my research, I was traveling around Norway and learned that people were out there getting their friluftsliv on in weather so cold that my eyelashes froze open, as illustrated. But you know what? The children were still happy. I was near crying with cold, but they were still happy. They were dressed in all of the right gear. And unsurprisingly, there is a lot of gear involved. They also sleep outside it's very cold. It used to be up till -20. When my children were small, it was up. They could sleep outside until it was -20 degrees Celsius. I'm afraid someone's going to have to help me with the US conversion there. But recently they said only till -10. So we're still talking snow here, but there is a sense that it's good for children. In the Nordic countries, they believe it helps your lungs develop. And actually, most Nordic children, anecdotally, from speaking to parents and the research I've been doing and the interviews, most Nordic children tend to be quite good sleepers because they are used to sleeping with these ambient sounds. When I travel in the US and the UK, new parent friends are often like, shh, you must whisper, the baby's just sleeping. Whereas in the Nordic countries, babies are outside in their prams and there's a dog barking and there's a tractor going past or a trash van. And they are used to these ambient sounds and they just tend to sleep wherever, whenever, when they need to, which I feel as a very light sleeper is a gift. I'm very happy I've given that to my children. So as I say, it does require a lot of kit. My children regularly go to school with rain trousers, rain jackets, snow suits, snow boots, rain boots. There's also a wind suit, which is a sort of quilted item, top and trousers. They wear a balaclava, strange, called an elephant hoo in Danish. Basically a balaclava, bank robbers and Danish toddlers. These are the big market for the balaclava. Mittens, waterproof layers on the outside. It's a lot. And I have 3 children, so I imagine the pack horse situation that I'm lugging to Vuggestue or Børnehavn every day. But it does keep them warm and dry. And it does mean that they can get out there by themselves. And interestingly, as you see this little girl here, children are expected to do it themselves, to get it on themselves, to get themselves dressed from the age of 2. Which I think many people find quite extraordinary, but they have big zips on both sides so that children can get their things on themselves. And it encourages, again, this Viking spirit, this sense of self-sufficiency, of resilience. And when you feel like you can be outside no matter what the weather, you do end up feeling quite strong. I am a late adopter to it, but now I have my own rain trousers and my own all-in-one snowsuit like Maggie from The Simpsons. And you do feel a little bit like I Am Viking, Hear Me Roar, when you can be outside and it's -10 and you think, yeah, I'm fine, I'm toasty. So I am a convert to this, and my children have been reared with it. They are also pretty good in the Nordic countries. In Viking land, it may come as no surprise, at adventurous play or risky play. So I will explain. There is a sense that in the Nordic countries, where there is free healthcare, admittedly, but it's much more accepted that children will climb a tree, fall, learn from it, climb again. And researchers have found that it's not the children who climb a tree and fall who have a fear of heights. It's the children who never climb a tree, who are prevented from adventurous play. And researchers believe that risky play or adventurous play in this way has an anti-phobic effect. So it can help with growth and resilience. It can help with mastery. And most researchers and psychologists from the Nordic countries now believe that children are natural thrill seekers. They seek out uncertainty and risks to increase their certainty because they don't know as much about the world. They're not as jaded as we are. So they want to know, is fire hot? If I touch this knife, what will happen? There is more of a sense that they need to try these things out. And many now feel that we fail as parents if we don't allow our children opportunities for age-appropriate risk. And that actually, if we really sort of cotton wool clad them at all times or wrap them in bubble wrap, as full disclosure, it would be my natural impulse as a parent to do. If we do that, then actually they are more likely to become slightly wild thrill seekers in the adolescent years. So that's when they're going to try and get their kicks from something far less wholesome than climbing a tree. So Nordic researchers and psychologists believe it's better to just let them try this as children, which can come as a bit of a shock from my British sensibilities. My children have all been regulars since preschool at the terrifying Danish institution known as Family Scouts. where my little redhead was given a knife and told, whittle this, and suddenly he was doing it. He came home with a leaflet one day, and I had to, my Danish still learning, so I had to translate it, and I was trying to work it out, and I learned, it was, which knife is best for you? Fixed blade, flick knife, or pen knife? And when he sees this picture now, incidentally, he says, oh, Mom, I'm so embarrassed. I said, oh, why, darling? Why are you embarrassed? And he said, oh, because actually that's not the right way to whittle. You're never supposed to whittle up. You've got to whittle down. Who knew? I did not know that. But there is more of a sense that you let children try these things. The one, I got an email from my son's scouts the other day saying, I thought it was going to be an invitation to like a bake sale or some administration or some sort of form I had to fill in. But no, it was on Wednesday, we build bonfire, bring daggers. My child, surprisingly good with an axe, he can build his own fire. He can't read or write, but he can build an amazing campfire. And as I say, my little ones sent there now as well. So this is how little they're giving them saws. And it gave rise to the now infamous family catchphrase, you can have a saw once you're 4, that I found myself saying to my toddler twins. So it's a big brain shift. It's one that's taken me a decade to come to terms with, but touch wood, and I'm now touching all the wood, there haven't been any serious injuries. And there is a sense that, of course, no one wants their children to come to harm. Of course, we want our children to be safe. But if we don't allow them to use their bodies to master these things, they're going to grow up more anxious, and they're going to take the risks in a far less safe way when they are teenagers. So now that is the role I try and do, and the rules I try and do in our house as well. I think what helps with the Nordic approach is there's a very different skew on this word, on discipline, or rather lack of it in the Nordic countries, because in the Nordic countries, discipline doesn't exist so much. Instead, there is a lot of respect, and respect is a given, by the way. It doesn't need to be earned. So there's none of the idea of respect your elders. It's more that everybody is worthy of respect just because they exist. It's like reading Oprah magazine, but it's something that Danes have been doing for generations. So instead of focusing on the behavior, for example, if a child is what we might term as acting out, there is a focus on what's behind that behavior. So there's a sense that it's always probably on the adult. What can I do differently to stop that behavior? And whereas we have phrases like the terrible twos or three-nagers, in Denmark, these phrases don't exist. They are known as the boundary years, because pushing boundaries is normal, not terrible. And it's the idea that if children are acting out, often it's to do with a lack of self-sufficiency. So remember, they're putting on their own snowsuits, putting on their own outdoor gear, being able to test their bodies, climb that tree. If we allow them this self-sufficiency, then they tend to behave better anyway. What Danes are really hot on, which came as a surprise, is they don't overpraise, and they also, I'll share this next slide, they let you do some play fighting. So this also came as a shock, coming here from another culture, but there is a sense that children are expected to be able to get themselves to what Danes often call the peace table by themselves, and that parents and caregivers and teachers even don't tend to interject. Now, play fighting is the most common type of play throughout mammals. Everyone in the animal kingdom will do it if naturally left to their own devices. Studies even show that rats deprived of the opportunity to play fight, but given care and socialization by older female rats, they will grow up rather almost more aggressive. They will lash out when it's not appropriate. They won't have learnt the rules of socialization, of how to be, and tend to be more aggressive as adolescents. So in the Nordic countries, there's a sense that you let children go for it, you let them get themselves to the peace table, and you only intervene when it gets really bad, which can feel really shocking, but it seems to play out throughout the Nordic countries. And speaking to caregivers and my children's teachers here, I've had to learn to do what Danes often call sitting on your hands as an adult. So you sit on your hands and just see if the children can be self-sufficient, if they can figure it out themselves. Interestingly, they also expect this level of self-sufficiency when it comes to timekeeping. So there's a great Danish parenting guru, the late psychologist Jesper Juul, and his parenting manuals throughout Denmark were hugely influential. And he's no longer with us, but one of his big things was that by the age of 5, a child should be able to get themselves up in the morning. And he suggested giving every child an alarm clock. And when I read this, I thought, that's insane. Age 5, I thought this was asking far too much of them. But he said, no, it's really important. And he even gives a script for how Danish parents should go about doing this. And the script goes something like, I paraphrase, but something like, translated to English, we used to think it was really cute to wake you up in the morning, but now we find it kind of a pain. So we want you to do it yourself from now on. And if there's something really important, we'll help wake you up. But generally, it's on you and you're getting an alarm clock. And so in the spirit of investigation, with my journalist hat on, I thought, oh, I'll give this a go. And I tried it on my eldest son and was expecting a big pushback. But no, he said, cool, I'm getting an alarm clock. And it worked. And now he has done that. And then we gave it to his younger siblings, his twin siblings, and they do it as well. So again, this self-sufficiency, it's giving children a lot of responsibility quite early, and seeing that they rise to it. But what they also do in Denmark is that they don't overpraise. In this culture where it's almost like every picture gets to go on the refrigerator, and every parent of a young child is sort of saying, oh, that's the best poop I've ever seen, well done. In Denmark and the Nordic countries, that is not the case at all. There is something called Jante's Law in Denmark. It's from a Danish-Norwegian author. It's a fictional set of 10 rules for living that are basically, you're not to think you're better than anyone else 10 times. And this came out in the 1930s, but has become hugely influential throughout Denmark, and it still sort of forms the bedrock of a lot of the way that Danes behave and treat children today. But this basically means that you don't praise children. Now, Jesper Juhl, again, this parenting guru who is very tough on alarm clocks, he said, replace praise with interest. So I hear a lot of, tell me how you did this, or what happens here? Respect is a given, remember, there's a flat hierarchical structure, not so many vertical relationships. You call everyone by their first name. There's no calling adults like Miss Russell or anything. No, it's all Helen. So this idea that if you overpraise children, it gives them a distorted sense of self-worth, and it means that they'll spend their whole adult life looking for external validation. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds very familiar. And I got to thinking that actually, the more I spoke to Nordic psychologists, this might be a pretty good way of living. If children can learn to evaluate things for themselves, especially in these days of social media, without looking for external validation all the time, might be a better way of living. So you don't get so many what I call stage school kids in Denmark. You don't get so many children who want to be famous, who want to be the next celebrity. Of course, there are some globalization. We are not immune to that, even in the Nordics. But this idea that everyone is equal, respect is a given, means that there isn't so much overpraising. And this helps with behavior as well, right? Because there's not somebody thinking they're just too big for their own boots. And it's a lot more normalized that everyone is worthy of respect. The next thing I learnt about living Danishly and raising Vikings and the Danish secret to happy children was that they can eat together daily. Now, I completely appreciate that if you don't have a Nordic-style working week, this is more challenging. But because remember, this family time is carved out from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. every day, which means that sitting down for a home-cooked meal with friends and family, both things really been proven to help with health and happiness. If you're eating homemade food, it's likely to be healthier. If you're sharing it with people, you're eating together, you're getting all of those pro-social benefits from that. So this sacred family time, and again, with this sort of very different approach to discipline in the Nordic countries, there is less of a sense of eat your broccoli first, or there's no pudding, or there's no dessert. Instead, this idea is that Danish children and all children in the Nordic countries may have idiosyncratic biological clocks. So they may not be hungry when we are, but may then develop an appetite half an hour later. So what Danish parents tend to do is offer them something quite boring after dinner. So maybe it's oatmeal, or maybe it's just a piece of bread, rye bread probably, so that there's not a reward for having turned down your savory main meal, but children aren't going to bed hungry. It's not a big deal. And the idea is that this will help eventually with kind of body image things, with ideas that you're supposed to finish all the food on your plate, which many of us may have grown up with. I certainly did. Instead, it's this idea that we trust children, we let them be self-sufficient. If that doesn't taste good to them, if that doesn't feel good in their body, they don't get made to eat it. And there's an idea that the refusal of food at mealtimes can be a sign that something's not wrong, especially with little kids. When you're 5, you don't have too many choices in life, so you make your power moves while you can, and the refusal of food can be a big part of that. So Danes just serve up regular hearty meals just in case, with a couple of snacks in between. There are some key differences, though, I would share, especially coming from the UK, where, I don't know about you, but in the UK, chips are a staple of most kids' lunches, right? In Denmark, not so much. They're quite judgy about the fact that me and my country men and women were reared on chips. Instead, it's a big, strong rye bread thing. Rye bread, it's impossible to overstate the importance of rye bread in Danish culture. It is a staple. It is delicious. It is, in the words of Oprah Winfrey, like eating a slice of the earth. And there's a huge pride that goes into it. So there is a sense that as long as children are, it's not necessarily always healthy food. It's not tend to be chips. They don't even sell them in individual packets where I live. So they're a less easy snacking option. Because what are you going to do? Open a family-sized packet and eat them all, as I said to my Danish friend. And then I have actually done that. But the point is, it's not always healthy, but it is hearty, the food that Danish children are fed. And it tends to be real food too. But there is they're not the world leaders on that. I would say Finland or Sweden, if you're interested, goes one step better. They give all children free school lunches, or as it's called in Finland and Sweden, just school lunches. And they have found that since this came in the 1940s, I believe, that it's really helped children be able to concentrate. And they found that children have grown taller. More children are able to go on to study higher education purely because they can concentrate more. And actually, they found that children who had these free school meals earned a 3% higher lifetime income. And children from poorer backgrounds benefited even more, earning a 6% higher lifetime income, purely because they could concentrate more, which is extraordinary. So Denmark doesn't do quite that well. It tends to be lunch packs for children rather than hot school meals cooked on the premises, but still it tends to be hearty. And as well as this idea of when children are hungry, feed them, not chips, but a sausage will do. There is a big emphasis on hot dogs here. Very strange. For an otherwise quite healthy, wholesome nation, big on hot dogs. And in Norway and Denmark, the love of hot dogs is so strong, there's even something called a ventepose. You might have heard of this, anyone who knows the language a little. Venter means waiting, pose means sausage. And this is the sausage that you have in the queue, in the line, as you wait for the main event sausage to be cooked. So that is their commitment to sausages. There's also, of course, the Danish pastries. And in Denmark, there's even a phrase for something called tooth butter. Anyone heard of this? This is when you slather on the butter so thick that you can see teeth marks when you bite into it. It's delicious, hard recommend, but not always healthy, but it is hearty and it will fill you up. So finally, I'm coming to school time. And I say finally because it does take a long time here. The age of 6, children are finally starting school, or 7 in Finland. And this is idea that, again, children work best learning through play. So again, a really flat hierarchical structure. You're calling teachers by their first names. There's no tests. There's no homework till the age of around 11, which, by the way, academics now see is a really good thing. Researchers from the University of Cambridge have found that the early onset of homework erodes family time and emotional development. So mad that we are all still doing this, and parents end up doing it as well. But here, there's more of an emphasis of teaching to children's interests. And interestingly, since World War II, there's also been a real emphasis on teaching democracy and the idea of challenging authority and questioning at all costs. So rather than learning by rote, it's much more about questioning, because as many of you will know, Denmark was occupied during World War II by the Germans, and there is a sense that after Denmark was liberated, there was a sense that we never want anything like this to happen again. And so one of the founding principles then of education from then on was very much to encourage children to question, to not just take things lying down, and to not accept truths that don't seem right to them, to challenge and to investigate for themselves. So that's a big thing here. There are 2 different types of school in Denmark. So there's folkeskole or friskole. Children go to the school with the same people from age 6 to 16, allowing these deep friendships to develop. And folkeskole is the normal one. Friskole is the private school, but it's not that private. It's heavily subsidized. So you're only paying maybe 25% of the cost of the school fees. And the goals, I always think it's worth pointing out, the goals of schooling in Denmark are challenging children to reach their potential, lowering the significance of social background, and fostering trust and enhancing well-being. So in many places around the world, in the UK included, it's only the first one that we have as a goal, right? In the UK, the goal is challenging children to reach their potential. Less about the kind of hearts and minds and how they're feeling and how their mental health is as they come out of the school system. So I think it's quite telling that in Denmark, it's the whole child they're thinking of from the day one. This really helps with social mobility, and actually children play for longer, they learn later, but they still end up doing better. So according to the PISA studies, by the age of 15, Danish children are at the same level as their peers in the US, the UK, even ahead of them in some subjects. So they get there in the end, which I think is really important to bear in mind. Another legacy of World War II, this idea of speaking out, questioning authority, is that there's a big culture of oracy in Danish schools. So public speaking, what I'm doing now, there is a sense that from the time they start vuggestue, from the time they start even in the tiniest institution when they can talk, they are encouraged to speak out, whether it's just talking about their weekend or presenting to class or doing kindergarten assembly. There is a sense that you respect each other's ideas. Remember, a flat hierarchical structure, none of these vertical relationships. You have to be prepared to change your mind. I'll move out of the way so you can see. You have to get yourself to the peace table. Remember the play fighting bears. You clarify, you challenge, you summarize. So you can be quite robust in your challenging to your peers, even to your teachers. It's okay to call out a colleague or a teacher in Denmark because of this flat hierarchical structure, because of the trust. You're doing it from a safe space. And you can build on the ideas and contribute and encourage other people to contribute as well. And this really helps in the workplace, where we know now so much of what we are doing with our soft skills, that presenting is a part of so many jobs, especially as AI continues to gallop apace. We don't know what the jobs of the future will be, but these interpersonal skills and the ability to advocate to yourself are always going to be hugely important. So again, I'm really pleased that my children are able to learn that. And it's something that I try and talk about in the UK now and try and bring on to other places, because although it happens in Wales and Scotland, it's not throughout most UK schools. And I would hazard the same is true of the US. Then after that, there is an amazing Danish institution known as Efterskole. This is a residential school that you can do for 1 year or 2 between the age of, say, 14 and 18. There's no exams, but there's a focus on the holistic development of each student. Again, subsidized by the government via taxes. But this is the place, they think of it like adult life with training wheels. A lot of the students I spoke to from Efterskole, where I would really like to go, but apparently they don't take 40 plus students. But they learn to cook for themselves. They learn to do their own laundry. They learn to do cleaning. They learn all of this age 16. And I once knew a 36-year-old who didn't know how to use a washing machine. So the idea that you would know all this by 16 seems wonderful to me. And interestingly, there's a lot of interest in setting these up now in Korea and Japan. Because it's so different and because it seems to turn out people so well. It means that people are more centered. A lot of the academics and psychologists I spoke to said that they could spot after-school students a mile off because they are more centered. And although you are paying a little bit for it, it's not extortionate, and 25% of Danish teenagers go to after school. So it's not free, but it is accessible to a quarter of the Danish population. And it seems like a wonderful experience. After that, the academically minded might go to something called gymnasium, which is where it ramps up a bit, gets a bit more academic, but when they finish, they have a big old party, which anyone who's seen the Mads Mikkelsen film, Another Round, this may be a familiar sight. They wear these sailor hats. It's come June time, so we've just had the end of the graduation. They wear these when they graduate, and they go around on party trucks and go crazy and celebrate for quite a long time. And it seems like an awfully lot of good fun indeed. So I would stress that it's not perfect in the Nordic countries. Nowhere is. There's been the rise of nationalism, as we've seen throughout Europe and the US. The weather is terrible, for starters. And also, what Danes aren't brilliant at, interestingly, is screens. There has been a digital blind spot in Denmark for the longest time, more so than in other countries. So the average age that a Dane gets a smartphone is 8 and 9. And it's only very recently, only since we got an education minister who's a bit more clued in on it all, only since February has the government been starting to talk about legislation and guidelines and what is appropriate amount of screen time. And during COVID, as many schools did the world over, things went screen-based. And there's now slowly coming this idea that actually research shows that we learn better from actual books, that there's no place for screens in many lessons in school. It's not necessary, that actually we should bring a few more books back in. So Denmark is finally waking up to this, but they are not brilliant on it. And because there's been this social codex to give children freedom, After, again, World War II, the legacy of that again, this same social freedom, the same idea of do what you like and be responsible and be self-sufficient has been given to children when it comes to screens as well, which I feel is a misstep because screens are designed to be addictive, and there are some really bright minds working on making the things that we're looking at so compelling that it's very difficult to get off as adults. So for children, even more so. Of course, the weather, I mentioned it briefly, but I would share that since this is Scandinavia House, this isn't a Danish word, but a Norwegian word describes perfectly how I feel about the weather in Viking land, and that's Døgnvild. This is the disorientation when you don't know if it's day or night, common in places where the sun does not set in summer and seldom rises in winter. So there is a sort of constant gloom, I would say October through March or April in Denmark where I am, where it's just dark and cold and like Lord of the Rings Mordor. And now when we're in summer, it's raining a lot every day, but it's only dark from midnight till 3 a.m. So I eventually get to sleep at around midnight when the birds stop singing and people stop having their jolly times, and then the bird starts again at 3 a.m. So no one's getting much sleep. Children are quite confused. Luckily, they've been sleep trained by sleeping in their prams, but yes, it's a challenge nonetheless. So as well as all the work I've been doing, I would love to end by bringing in the work, you'll know this is the Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And he believed there was this 5-tier hierarchy of human needs, each of which needed to be met before we could move on to worrying about other things. And this, I would argue, is one of the key reasons that Danes are so happy and why they help raise these sort of happy, healthy, resilient children and throughout all the Nordic countries. And the first level of this is the basics, really. It's food, water, sleep, and then safety, so security of employment, of education, then social, so your friendships, esteem, respect, and finally self-actualization, the highest thing we're all aiming for in life, this idea of who am I? What am I for? Well, in Denmark, you pretty much have your basic needs taken care of by the state, funded by taxes, allowing you to move onwards and upwards more easily. There is security of health and employment with free healthcare funded by taxes, free at point of use in Denmark. There's something called a flex security model. So if you lose your job, you can be paid up to 80% of your salary for up to 2 years. The unions are very strong. So again, you'll be helped with training to get another job. There's the social piece with samfundssyn, this idea of trust, that we're all in it together, the clubs and associations. Danish children go to school with the same people aged 6 to 16, allowing these deep friendships to develop. And esteem is prioritized in many areas of Danish life. Think the oracy, think the idea of speaking out, challenging authority, flat hierarchical structures, meaning many Danes are getting a leg up right to the top of the triangle. And looking at it this way, it's no wonder they are so happy. They are having a great life and they're not hurting anyone else to get it. And compared to countries like the UK and the US, many are not even getting past the second rung of safety. So I will end by summarizing the 10 lessons for raising mini Vikings and for the secrets to living Danishly and raising happy Danish children. And that the first is that family comes in many forms. What matters is how much we're loved. It doesn't matter if it's not the norm core coupling of 2.4 children. That's no guarantee of happiness. We know enough about that by now. So we should embrace all families. The next is that happy parents make for a happy economy. It's not pure altruism that every dollar invested in childcare, the broader economy gets at least $1.50 back. The next is trust, volunteer, finding your samfundssyn. If you feel the sense of belonging, you feel like you're all in it together, you have the headspace to be happy, and life's easier too. The next is around work, life, and crucially, balance. Carving out family time, a non-negotiable time that you can spend with your family, means that you'll be more productive at work the next day. It's not going to make you a slacker. You're going to work smarter, not harder. The next is around play. Play is important whatever our age. It makes us happier and healthier, and we need all of the types of play to do it. 6 is getting active and getting outdoors. So remember this active transport. Danish children are getting themselves to school. They're going outdoors to whatever the weather, wearing the right outdoor gear, getting it on themselves. It gives us a sense of mastery over our bodies. 7 is risk equals reward. Instead of just doing a risk assessment of all potentially thrilling play, many are now advocating a risk-reward assessment, thinking about what are the benefits if I just give a chance on this and have a go and see what happens and climb all the trees. Next, it's forget discipline, think about how to empower children. Children are often underestimated. They can do a lot more than we give them credit for. And if we empower them, you just see them sort of unfurl like flowers. You see that they can cope with a lot, that they are happier, they feel proud, they feel a sense of accomplishment. And again, this idea of mastery. The next is eating together. And when children are hungry, you feed them real food. There's no real science or magic trick behind it. The Danish approach is much more offer them hearty meals 3 times a day. They'll be fine without much pressure, without sort of making issues around food. So I'm trying to do the same now. And finally, teaching children how to think, not what to think. This has been a game changer for someone raised in the British school system where learning by rote was still a thing. And we are encouraged to show utter deference to our teachers. But here, children are encouraged to question, to find their own voice and use it, which in these times where we don't know what the future jobs will be, seems like a pretty good plan. So that's all from me. I would love to hear from you, and I hope you have enjoyed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do have some questions. The first question is how are high achievers treated? Do they feel guilt? Is modesty valued without limiting success?
Interesting. Yes, modesty is very much valued. There isn't guilt to high achieving, no, not at all. I think there is more a sense of that there isn't the same pressure until maybe you get to gymnasium and then maybe you're flourishing there. So I completely take that point, and that is something that I often hear. It's like, what happens when if you do want to excel? And I spoke to Finland, for example, is famous for having the best school system in the world for years and years and years. And I spoke to educators and parents there, and they said that it's almost as though the schools will find a way to cater for your child, and that they will find a way. They don't have an expert on coding, for example, and your child is an absolute whiz on coding and knows more than the teachers. They will get someone else in because these are wealthy countries, because they have this tax money funded by encouraging men and women into the workplace. And because of these high taxes, they have this pot of money so that they can get an expert in. They have these resources that they can pull in to help with specialisms, with, again, with special needs on the other side. So I would say it's not pushed, and my children are still quite young, so it's not something I've personally experienced, but from my research, it seems that the resources are there. And no, there's no guilt, but yeah, modesty is very much celebrated.
Okay. Here's another question. Do you know the system of Finland, and are there parallels and differences between Denmark and Finland?
Yeah, so interestingly, so Finland, as the questioner so rightly is pointing out, has been the benchmark for so long now, for so many. And what Finland did is really interesting, is that they sort of when Finland got its independence, the country was largely sort of put together by academics. This is a sweeping generalization, but largely the emphasis on learning and the emphasis on short lessons and not too much time in school. And again, learning through play, so not starting school till the age of 7, has been very important. And teachers are really valued in Finland. You have to get pretty high academic levels to become even a generalist. And if you want to be a specialist teacher, you have to have specialist qualifications in that area. The idea that teaching is a profession that there is a lot of respect around, that you would want to go into, I think is really important, because then you're attracting high quality teachers who have a commitment to enjoy their work, and there's a lot of teacher autonomy. So troublingly, a lot of the other Nordic countries have seen the example of Finland, and Finland doing so well in the PISA studies, and thought, oh goodness, we better try and put more pressure on children to up our game, and not to the same extent as maybe the UK or the US have, but now they are slowly realizing, oh, how Finland got there is they allowed a lot of teacher autonomy, and they allowed learning through play, and they gave teachers a lot of respect. So there is now a push for encouraging those things in the other Nordic countries, I would say, generally.
And here's a question on primary schools. Do Danish primary schools teach kids that there are more than 2 genders? Do schools there encourage kids to think and decide if they want to be a boy or a girl? And she thanks you at the end.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's really normalized. I would say when I see sort of the culture wars around the world, it's not something that has seemed so much of an issue in Denmark. I wonder whether, because there is such a liberal culture, remember, you're getting 37 different types of family. My children have known how to use they, them, from the age they could speak. It was completely normalized as young as vuxstu, so that's age 0 to 3, 10 months to age 3. It's in Sweden, for example, they have a gender neutral pronoun, they have hen, and it's not that you wouldn't say he or she in kindergarten, but if you're reading a book, for example, and it doesn't matter whether that person is male or female, or it's not relevant, or that person doesn't want to be identified as that, you would use hen. And at a stage, I think there's some research out of Florida that shows that a lot of children's books, the heroes are still male, and I am forever changing the gender or trying to switch it up a bit, or using they, them when I read children's books to my children, that it feels as though it's much more normalized that you can be who you want to be in the Nordic countries without it being much fuss. So yeah, my children know children who are identifying as they, them, and it's just them. It's just how they are.
And it looks like the last question is, are there private schools? And if yes, why would people send their kids to those if public schools are so good?
Great question. Yes, there are private schools. So these are the free schools. So there's folk school, which is the normal school, and then free school, even though it's not free, that's the private school. But interestingly, they are massively subsidized again. So still massively subsidized by the state. So if you had set aside an amount of money to send your children to daycare, which maybe, I don't know, $400 a month, sending your child to a private school would only be about that much moving forward. So a lot of parents who have set aside that money anyway might choose to send their children to a free school because they have a slightly different specialism. Maybe it's a bit more Montessori or a bit more Steiner school. In Copenhagen, there are a lot of private schools. I'm not entirely sure why. I think there is a sense that, yeah, you have that money anyway. Maybe there's a school nearer to you and you want your children to go to that. I'd say amongst my cohort, there is a real mix, but a private school is not very private in Denmark. It's not very inaccessible. It's the same as what you might be spending to send your children to childcare, to normal daycare. And yeah, I think most people, parents of free school students, would say it's because they want a strange sort of specialism, or they want more parental control in the school.
We do have one more question. The US has suffered from Asian influence. I'm not sure what that means. Robotics over scheduled perfect children as a goal. Has Denmark avoided this unfortunate global influence?
I would say Denmark's emphasis is around learning through play. So it's about getting mucky. It's about testing things out. It's not structured. There isn't homework till the age of 11. There is no academic pressure. You don't get grades until you get till gymnasium largely. So this is late teenage. So there isn't the same pressure that we hear about from other cultures. As I say, the after school system, which is the boarding school that children can go to for 1 or 2 years, it's really interesting that South Korea has taken such an interest in that, and that they're building lots of them there, because Korea is another country where they're always doing incredibly well on the academics, along with Finland. But for a completely different reason, because there is a much more structured, a much more pressurized environment. So Denmark is kind of the opposite to that. And I would say the fact that there is so much interest from Korea about doing a sort of a Denmark approach as an alternative for parents who don't want that high pressured environment is quite telling, and kind of tells you what you need to know.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's all for the questions today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to speak with us today, Helen. Thank you, audience, for joining us. Yeah, and again, thank you, everyone.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.